How should the oppressed respond to their oppression? Do they have a right to fight back? Do they have a right to seek justice? Do they have a right to seek vengeance? These are the questions posed in the latest episode of X-Men 97, and the way people answer them is a good litmus test for their sense of morality, reason, and justice. The episode covers the aftermath of the attack on Genosha. A week has passed, and the world has turned its back on mutants. The UN refuses to provide further assistance, the US government refuses to track down Bolivar Trask and Henry Gyrick, and the humans only care about whether there will be a war between them and the mutants. The only ones concerned with the victims of the attack are the X-Men, who now must cope with their grief over the loss of their friends, and with the reality that Xavier's dream appears to have failed. That's a lot to chew on, and it's handled well in the episode, but I thought the reaction to the episode was way more interesting, because it's a good litmus test for people's sense of morality, reason, and justice. If someone's more upset that a person is angry that their group was a victim of an atrocity than they are about the atrocity itself, it says a lot about how that person views oppression and discrimination. If someone's more upset that a person refuses to tolerate people who excuse the atrocity than they are about the atrocity itself, it says a lot about how that person views tolerance and intolerance. And if someone's more upset that a person seeks vengeance against those who committed the atrocity than they are about the atrocity itself, it says a lot about how that person views justice. How far is too far? That's the main question of the episode. How much can you oppress someone before it crosses a line? What is the limit? And once it's reached, what's the fair and appropriate response? It's interesting watching how the critics of the show, those who sided with Trask, Gyrick, and the Executioner, answered these questions because their responses were completely hypocritical. Now, the episode opens with Gambit's funeral. Nightcrawler gives a eulogy. It's well written and it's a fantastic send-off for Gambit. However, I saw people acting surprised that Nightcrawler is shown wearing a priest collar. They weren't surprised that he's a priest, but because he's still a Christian in the show. Yeah, that's part of his character. They showed this in the original series. Why would people be surprised? That's a rhetorical question, I know the answer. The Christian right has a very weird persecution complex that has no basis in reality. They assume that they're constantly under attack, even though a third of the world's population is Christian. It's the dominant religion in the West. You see it everywhere you go in the United States. It's even on our money. Christians are not being silenced, hidden, or removed, so the persecution complex is just silly. Stop it. The whole X-Men team is there at the funeral except for one person, and Jubilee doesn't understand why Rogue would skip Gambit's funeral. Wolverine tells her it's because everyone grieves in their own way, but Nightcrawler says that it's not mere grief that keeps Rogue away, and Jubilee is wise to be afraid because Rogue is screaming for vengeance. And this is where the critics of the show reveal their hypocrisy, because they're not only mad that Rogue lives up to her name, but also that she's trying to track down the people who murdered her kind, her friends, and her man. If ever there was a just cause to seek vengeance, the murder of thousands of people, including your beloved, would be it, but apparently not to the critics of the show. And therein comes their hypocrisy, because most of these people, due to their political and religious views, have a strong sense of vengeance. This is why they love characters like the Punisher and Rorschach. Those two go after evildoers, and they don't compromise. They take them out. So you'd think the critics would support Rogue's actions, but no. So, when Rogue shows up at a top-secret military base, it doesn't matter that the show implies that all the men aided and abetted Gyrick and Trask. It doesn't matter that the base commander, General Thunderbolt Ross, appears to be in on the US government releasing Trask and Gyrick and jacking them up in safe houses. What matters is that Rogue attacked a military base, and by doing that, she justified humans fearing mutants because look at how dangerous one mutant can be when angered and how hard they'd be to stop, and she's not even an Omega-level mutant. Yes, one mutant would be so hard to stop that it'd be nearly impossible for humans to say, wipe out a small city full of them. Oh, wait.
Hab keine Angst. Omega threat eliminated.
Setting aside the stupidity of saying this after one human single-handedly built machines that wiped out a whole city full of Omega-level mutants, how in the hell does Rogue seeking vengeance after the murders justify humans fearing mutants? This is like watching A Time to Kill, seeing white people's racism against black people, and then claiming that when Sam Jackson's character kills the guys who raped his daughter, He's justifying white people's fear of black people because he's showing how dangerous one nigger can be when angered. I'm black, I can say it, and how hard they'd be to stop. If you think killing mutants will set them off, not killing mutants is an option. You could try not doing it. That said, I love the disconnect here because the critics completely ignored the context. It's been a week since the attack on Genosha. At some point during that week, the X-Men, or just Rogue herself, discovered that the US government released Trask and Gyrick and probably know their whereabouts. So it's not as if Rogue immediately started attacking military bases. And Rogue doesn't target innocent people. She's not randomly killing humans. She goes after the people directly responsible for the attack or those who aided and abetted the people who were responsible for the attack. I suppose that people could argue that the men on the base were just following orders, but that's not a very good excuse for helping to commit an atrocity. My question to those critics is, what should Rogue have done? After finding out that her own government aided and abetted a massacre of her people, what was the correct response Rogue should have taken? If they say she should have gone through legal and diplomatic channels, well, that didn't go over well with them either. In the very next scene, Cyclops argues with President Kelly about continuing the rescue effort in Genosha. Kelly and the UN no longer want to help mutants because it's bad political optics. Cyclops throws this back in Kelly's face and says maybe it would look better if they were humans instead of mutants. Kelly tells him not to get so testy because he's trying to keep out people less sympathetic to the mutant cause, and in frustration, Cyclops hangs up on the president. The response from the critics was that Cyclops was being a whiny, ungrateful bitch. So, to recap, fighting the people who attacked you, no bueno. But also, asking for help from the people who aided and abetted the people who attacked you, no bueno. What are mutants to do? There's an answer to that question, but let's hold on to it for a moment. Now, I love this scene because it plays out like the conversation civil rights leaders had with Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, and Johnson. During the heyday of the civil rights movement, Kennedy and Johnson tiptoed around the violence directed at activists and black people in general because of the political capital they'd lose if they sided with the black community. All four presidents did little to address the violence until there was a greater public outcry for change. It took events like the March on Selma, where cameras captured the police brutalizing protesters, for those changes to happen. So Kelly's response is historically accurate. Most people in power don't do anything to help victims of discrimination unless they can politically gain from it. The critics' response is also historically accurate. They would have opposed the civil rights movement for the same reason they think the executioner is based, namely that the other side should be feared because they're dangerous and whining about nothing. And that's where the hypocrisy comes back in, because the massacre in Genosha is not nothing. Thousands of people died. Many thousand more were injured. The psychological toll on those who survived is incalculable. And yet none of the people claiming Rogue acted in the wrong had anything to say about the attack. They completely ignored it. Not a word about it. And to be honest, I find it kind of funny because it takes an Olympic level of cognitive dissonance to claim that humans are justified in fearing mutants because of what mutants could potentially do, while acting like no mutant is ever justified in fearing, hating, or wanting revenge for what humans actually did to mutants. The reason I find it so interesting is because that mindset isn't limited to fiction. The critics apply it to fiction because this is how they actually think about real-world situations, and that continues with the next scene. The X-Men finally go to Genosha. Trish Tilby shows up to report on the aftermath, but her conversation with Beast goes south. Mutants across the world have taken to the streets in protest of the attack. Beast quotes MLK, saying riots are the language of the unheard. But Tilby says that smashing windows is destruction, not communication, and that normal people won't accept mutants if they feel threatened. Now, she's not wrong. Breaking things isn't going to make anyone like or listen to you. It's only going to make them afraid of you. That's obvious to any rational person. So you would think it would occur to Tilby, and the people nodding in agreement with her, that this would also hold true in the reverse. Building sentinels to hunt mutants, blowing up their cities, and killing them and their children wouldn't make mutants like or listen to humans. It would make them afraid of humans, and justifiably so. Tilby's response comes across as completely tone-deaf. It implies that the only response mutants should have is to take the violence and plead for tolerance from the people literally trying to wipe them out. That's a really stupid idea, which is why Beast says this.
Perhaps the professor's vision for the future was too nearsighted, and begging for your tolerance was our first mistake.
And that just pissed off the critics of the show. They're like, she's trying to be sensitive, and he's throwing it back in her face. Yeah, because it's a stupid thing to say. Why should someone beg for the tolerance of people who want to kill them? The typical response to this is that, well, mutants are dangerous, but that argument simply doesn't work. Now, I have to admit, I made a mistake. I gave people the benefit of doubt that they would think through that argument and see the flaws. But they didn't, so that's not a mistake I'm going to make again. So allow me to blaxplain why the claim that humans are justified in fearing mutants because mutants are dangerous is a bad argument. 1. Humans don't fear any other superpower beings. In the Marvel Universe, humans are fine with people who gain powers through accidental, scientific, or mystical means. They take no issue with gods like Thor, Ares, or Hercules. They have little issue with aliens except for those who attack the planet. And then there are the super scientists like Tony Stark, Hank Pym, and Reed Richards. These people build weapons and devices that can destroy the world dozens of times over, and yet none of them are hated for being smarter than everyone else. It makes no sense that humans would be justified in fearing mutants when they aren't afraid of every other superpower being in the Marvel Universe. 2. Most mutants don't have dangerous powers. Most of them have powers that make them little more than glorified nightlights. They look weird, or they might have a little quirk about them, like they can hear colors or talk to trees, so it makes no sense that humans would be justified in fearing mutants when the only difference between humans and the average mutant is the color or texture of their skin. And 3, and this is a really important one, humans attack and kill far more mutants than the other way around, and unlike mutants, virtually none of it is by accident. Humans intentionally target people they think are mutants. They create machines to detect and hunt mutants. They create weapons to depower mutants to make more powerful mutants easier to kill. This is the only one where it almost makes sense for humans to fear mutants, but only because it's reasonable to be afraid that the people you're hurting might try to return the favor. There simply isn't any good reason for humans to fear mutants in the Marvel Universe. It doesn't make logical sense. And that lack of logic touches on Beast's reaction because there's a massive flaw in the idea of tolerance too. You should never become so tolerant that you tolerate intolerance. But that's exactly what the mutants walk themselves into. They've put up with intolerance for so long that they're left with only 2 options: fight back and risk having that used against them, or keep begging for tolerance from the people literally trying to kill them. So again, what are mutants to do? The correct answer, at least to the critics of the show, is for them to keep begging for tolerance. What does that look like? Well, kind of like this.
Look what happens when we don't hide, when we shove it in their face.
This is a perfect example of what happens when people keep trying to play to folks who won't listen to them. People end up compromising to the point that they think creating a separate nation nowhere near humans that most humans would never even visit is somehow shoving it in humans' faces. We get another version of this when Roberto finally comes out to his mother. She already knows he's a mutant and seems tolerant, but immediately tells Roberto that he needs to hide that he's a mutant and learn to be discreet, meaning don't hang out with an open mutant like Jubilee, because it's bad for the family business. The compromise is a one-way street. Only the mutants have to give up something. The humans never do. This is shown again when Rogue goes to the military base up north, only to be stopped by Captain America. And what does America's top cop, as Rogue calls him, want? Cap says that he came to this super secret off-the-books base to find Gyrick. He's discovered that Gyrick is holed up in Mexico, so Rogue's like, let's go get him. But Cap refuses. He goes, what would it look like if I showed up in this uniform? Rogue says, like you stand behind mutants. And Cap goes, my hands are tied. So Rogue does this.
Well, if your hands are tied, you won't be needing this.
That is the pettiest shit ever, and I loved every second of it. The funny part about the critics' reaction to this moment is that they were more pissed at Rogue throwing the shield and not working through proper channels than that Captain America is completely out of character. In the comics, there's no way Captain America would just ignore this. He's part of the government, but he's not a lapdog. That was shown in Civil War. He's not just going to do as he's told. The moment he said, what would it look like if I showed up in this uniform? The next scene would have him in Mexico with Rogue, dressed in black. The suit comes off. Cap's morals don't. He would never side with the government to protect Gyrick. That's the thing to be upset about, that Cap is out of character, not that Rogue threw his shield. The same goes for the reaction to Rogue finding Gyrick and using her powers to find out where Trask is hiding. This is not the first time Rogue has used her powers like this, either in this season, the original show, or in the comics, but for some reason, this moment really bothered the critics. So, to recap, Rogue absorbing the memories of a bigoted doctor so that she can help deliver Madeline Pryor's baby, perfectly fine. Rogue absorbing the memories of a mass murderer so she can find his accomplice, well, that's the greatest evil ever committed against humanity. Unfortunately, the absorption doesn't go well for Rogue because Gyrick is no longer what he seems to be. Meanwhile, Trask decides to contact the X-Men because he's having shades of a guilty conscience. It's hard to claim he actually feels sorry since he's already killed hundreds if not thousands of mutants with his Sentinels over the years. He tells the X-Men to meet him in Madripoor. Before they go there, they drop by Mexico to pick up Rogue, but instead of finding her in the compound on the base, she's outside the base. Nightcrawler has a touching moment with her since she's his adopted sister, and also a petty moment of his own when Rogue says, "Look at me crying because I lost a boy." And he's like, "Actually, you lost two." I guess pettiness runs in the family. That said, I still don't understand how Rogue wound up outside the base. Did someone put her there? Did she fly there? What happened? At any rate, the X-Men head to Madripoor and discover a secret base with advanced Sentinels. They bump into Trask, who Morph calls a poor man's Oppenheimer, and Trask reveals that his Sentinel project was taken over by a group called OZT, Operation Zero Tolerance, and that Sinister helped create these new Sentinels. However, the tech is beyond anything Sinister could do with modern means, but Trask doesn't know where Sinister got the tech from. He then goes to self-delete, but Rogue catches him. She tells him that if he wants redemption, he needs to help them find the real bad guy. He says he's got nothing, and she's like,
Same sugar.
The X-Men are floored, shocked, in total awe, but not enough to do anything. Nightcrawler is like, "What have you done? Let his ass fall, just like you're doing." Nobody tries to save Trask. Kurt could have teleported, Jean could have caught him, Morph could have done something. Nope, they just let him fall. And this was the big one for the critics of the show, because why? It can't be because the X-Men don't kill, because that's not true. The X-Men tried to avoid killing, but Wolverine, Storm, Kitty Pryde, Psylocke, Cyclops, Cable, Bishop, and even Colossus have killed people, and all before the Krakoa era. It can't be because Rogue is doing it, because it's understandable that she'd do it after hunting this dude across the globe. He killed her man, so she's not in her normal frame of mind. And it can't be because Trask doesn't have it coming, because he helped murder thousands of mutants on Genosha, and probably killed just as many with the Sentinel program. These critics are outraged that Rogue killed Trask, but these are the same people who love characters like the Punisher and Rorschach because they kill villains. These are the same people who argue against Batman's no-kill policy because he's letting the villains kill again. But when Rogue kills a mass murderer who targeted thousands of people minding their own business, that's bad? The hypocrisy is amazing. It's like the only reason they oppose this is because they support Trask and his policies. That his policies and actions are barbaric doesn't factor in. And never mind that the dude just tried to off himself anyway. No, Trask gets a pass because reasons. Ironically, the fall doesn't kill him. It turns out he's been augmented into a new type of Sentinel, a Prime Sentinel, one powerful enough to take out Rogue with one punch. In fact, he takes down all the X-Men easily. He almost kills Cyclops, but Cable comes in for the save with an EMP. Jean reads Cable's thoughts and realizes who he is. Cyclops sees his eyes and realizes that it's Nathan, but they don't have time to chat. Cable tells him that Trask is working with someone who's much worse than Sinister. Who could that be? Bastion, the man who's not exactly what he appears to be. Shortly after the X-Men rescued Rogue, Bastion dropped by Gyric's base and killed him. As he does it, the radio starts randomly playing Purple People Eater. If you know your X-Men lore, you should be able to figure out why. After Cable takes out Trask, Bastion and Sinister chat about activating Trask too soon. But Bastion doesn't care because he's got something else up his sleeve. A satellite video showing a very much alive Xavier pledging to marry Lilandra. Now he's seemingly got evidence that the X-Men faked Xavier's death. And if that weren't enough, he's also got a master of magnetism at his disposal. What a way to end the episode. This was excellent. It showcased what makes the X-Men the X-Men. You've got these intense moral quandaries at play. Had the critics been less sensitive, they might have noticed the underlying element in the show, namely just how important Xavier is to the X-Men and their cause. Without him, without his guidance, the X-Men lose hope, lose patience, and ultimately lose their way. This is a recurring theme in many X-Men stories. The X-Men are at their best when guided by Xavier. He has the strength of character and will to keep them on the path of his dream. Without him, everything basically goes to shit. It'll be interesting to see how the show handles Xavier's return. There's still a chance the show might fumble the ending. We all watched Game of Thrones. It has happened before. But I hope it doesn't, because while this wasn't quite classic X-Men, the show is in the ballpark. And man, is it nice to finally have good X-Men stories after so many years of the comic books sucking balls. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.